days are where you take what you've experienced, don't let it drag you down, but use it to push yourself forward.
Welcome everyone to the third episode of the Fitzness Academy podcast. Who thought it would actually reach the third episode? I didn't even think it would reach the first. So here we are for number 3. I'm very, very gratefully joined by Joseph Marples, a good friend of mine. I'm very, very honored to have him on the podcast. Joe is a operating department practitioner within obviously the medical industry, and I wanted to really get a grasp of obviously not just what's going on, but obviously what he does. As I said, this is not just going to be about athletes. I think as a whole, the Fitzness Academy, what we're about is about sort of promoting hard work from every point of view, whether you're an athlete or whether you're someone obviously who works in other sectors, such as the big man here. So what we're going to do is we're going to get started. Tell us a little bit about you, mate. However, actually, no, forget. I made a mistake already. Third episode, I already made my mistake. Tell us your joke, mate. You said you've seen one of the previous episodes. Tell us your joke.
Oh, I'm quite a bad person. I like my dad jokes, so
likewise.
Not good. I'm not saying they're good. I just like my dad jokes. The worse, the better. What do you call a fish with no eyes?
What's that?
I've got a better one.
Okay. I like the last one, like the first episode. I'll let you try again.
What do you call a Spanish? How many Spanish men does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
Just one. Sorry, that's really bad.
I've actually never heard of that one. I actually really like that. That's actually really good. I've never heard of that one. That is
I'm a medical professional, not a comedian.
Explains why you're operating department practitioner, mate. Anyway, absolutely. We'll get cracking. Obviously, I always like to break the ice with a joke. That is the whole point. We're all about the positive vibes. But we'll get cracking. Obviously, as I mentioned, operating department practitioner. Can you tell me a little bit about your role, mate?
Okay, so the operating department practitioner is almost an unknown entity amongst a lot of people. But to kind of put it in simplified terms, because I've spent the past 2, 3, 4, 5, how many years trying to explain what it is to people and never really found a good way of explaining, because most people kind of look at you and go, what? So effectively, it's a specialized role which works within the operating department within a hospital. So the operating department is what you consider to be surgery. So for anyone who's working within that surgical environment, we're trained to work either assisting the surgical team, so the surgeons, or we're trained also to assist the anaesthetists in anaesthetic care. We also work in post-operative care, so people who are in the recovery stage of after they've had surgery. From a perspective of our profession, that's the simplified version. It's an expanding role. It's always expanding. You're finding people now working in outlying areas such as A&E, intensive care, transfers, management. There's a lot of other roles which that can delve into, but on a simplified version, we're specialized staff which work in the operating department, whether that be anesthesia or surgery.
Mate, actually, to be brutally honest with you, sort of when you actually told me sort of the exact role, obviously I knew exactly sort of what you do normally. Obviously we've discussed it privately, etc. But to be brutally honest with you, I was actually aware sort of how much you actually do. So you're kind of like a Swiss Army knife in a way, aren't you? So you kind of you got your basic function, and then obviously you got all these sort of little sort of multi tools that sort of stick out. So yeah, that's amazing to hear, because then obviously that's quite good, because it leading on to my next sort of point. I think we're jumping the gun, but I like that we're jumping the gun. We're not all about sort of the question interview way here. We're all about sort of having a nice casual conversation. Obviously, it does also. So does that obviously give you a little bit of a sort of excitement, obviously going to work, because then you're like, well, what am I going to do today? Obviously, where am I going to be working exactly? Does that give you a bit of sort of, it keeps the job interesting, if you like, in a simple way?
I'd say so. I'd say the operating department in general. So in the surgical side of things, there's it's such a wide field that you can get into. There's so much to it. that actually, yes, we're very specialized to that specific area, but there's a lot of work which goes into that. So there's a lot of different aspects of the surgical side. So there's a lot of different specialities within surgery that you could do. And on the anesthetic side, and anesthesia allows you almost to work in a number of different areas. So you can work with, obviously, in the operating department. You can also go and take those skills and work within intensive care. You can be, if you're in an emergency scenario, going down to A&E, outlying areas, going out on transfers. I know there's certain ODPs which work as part of their, like, the helicopter teams, which go out to, like, major road traffic accidents. You know, you can take these skills and almost take them to a multitude of different environments. And it is exciting. You know, you can come in and you can almost not know what you're going to be doing for the day and have to kind of adapt to that certain scenario. Will I be working on elective cases within general surgery today? Am I going to be going down and working on emergency trauma orthopedics, where you don't know what's really coming and it can change at any moment? So yeah, it is exciting. I think that's one of the reasons I kind of like the job that I do, is that you can come into work and every day is almost different. You can be doing a multitude of different things, and that does keep it interesting from my standpoint.
That's exactly that's the excitement I was kind of trying to get out of you, if that makes sense, because obviously, you know, a lot of people sort of, whether sort of they want to or not, are kind of stuck in maybe that sort of, that, I'm going to go as far as and say that monotonous routine, actually. Yeah, I'm going to say that sort of monotonous routine where sort of you go to work, you're like, yeah, it's true. Yeah, I was doing this yesterday. Yeah, oh yeah, I need to do this for another 2 weeks, you know, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all.
No,
different roles sort of suit everyone, you know. But, you know, coming a bit more towards you, sort of, I'm interested to know, what was your journey sort of towards sort of getting to the role that you're at now? So what was that step point from, like, you actually want to do this?
So I've gone a really strange way about things. So I've gone a really alternative route to becoming an ODP. So I've always kind of had an interest within healthcare and the clinical side of things, but never really totally knew what it was specifically that I wanted to do. So actually, I came into ODP in I wouldn't say actually late, because there's actually a lot of people which come into our profession who've done other jobs prior to being an ODP. It's not something you find actually that many people come into straight from school. It's kind of something you take to a later life. So I started my training, I think, when I was 24, 25. Prior to that, I was a professional skier. I was a ski instructor for 5 years. And then prior to that, I was working in the fitness industry. And I think I'd always had an interest within healthcare and fitness, but never really knew what it was I entirely wanted to do. I didn't particularly know in terms of ability. Medicine, I thought that's going to be a bit too much of a push for myself academically. Nursing, it never really appealed to me, I'm not going to lie. And then one day I was kind of scrolling through jobs within the healthcare industry and kind of came across ODP, and, you know, explained that it was a very hands-on, very clinical job. You'd be assisting with anaesthetists, you'd be working within the surgical environment, working with surgeons, scrubbing up for cases. And I think that really hit on me in terms of that clinical aspect and that interesting aspect of surgery and theatres. And from there, I kind of just took that further and started to understand the role more and what it was, and started to kind of do my research and realize, you know what, this is for me. But even until the first day that I kind of started my training, I didn't really know what that would entail. I'd say for most, theatres is a very Marmite subject where you'll find a lot of healthcare professionals, they either love it or they hate it. It's not for everybody. It's a very odd speciality to get into. You either love it or you hate it. But from the minute one that I started my training, I knew that for me, I loved it, and that was it. So for me, that was it. I was sorted.
Yeah, mate, that's an incredible journey, to be fair, because sort of the classic probably story for someone within the hospital environment, or sort of a medical environment, to be very broad, sort of would think doctor, nurse, maybe at most maybe a midwife, I would say, like sort of looking sort of very broad like. So in that sense, you know, does that make you sort of, obviously now is going to be slightly different, but did you sort of go, right? So were you one of those people? Obviously, I'm going to admit that to be brutally honest with myself, a lot of these sort of roles are sort of brushed under the carpet a little bit, or sort of maybe not sort of credited enough, because obviously where there is, I can't remember the exact quote which I heard, but it was something I was watching, something like 24 hours in A&E or sort of inside the ambulance or something like that, and it was something like, for every doctor there are sort of 5 nurses, and after 5 nurses there are I can't remember the exact quote, but then there are like 15 people behind them, like sort of behind the scenes. So does that sort of were you sort of that person who sort of didn't realize how sort of extensive it was behind the scenes, and sort of what is sort of your thoughts behind that?
Absolutely. I think when you look at the healthcare industry, and I think it's a natural for everybody who's not within that industry to kind of look, and you automatically go to doctors and nurses. I think from a perspective of having now got the experience of working within a hospital, you don't actually realize how many professions there are. And I think even when you talk about doctors and nurses, there's such a multitude of different, you can't just put doctors in one bracket and nurses in another. There's different fields within those fields. So you're looking at, for example, doctors. You've not just got doctors, you've got anaesthetists, you've got intensivists, you've got surgeons, you've got, you've got such a multitude of different professions within that profession. And same with nursing. You've got nurses who are not just, that's a nurse. They can do, they're here to do everything. You've got intensive care nurses, you've got cancer nurses, you've got respiratory nurses, you've got nurses which work in a multitude of different fields, and they've got an extensive knowledge of that specific area. Like, we all have a base knowledge, but there's so many different areas within a hospital which actually, you can go into. And, you look at ODPs, almost an unknown profession outside of the hospital. And even within the hospital, we're almost kind of a profession which not many people really understand or know of, unless you've directly worked with us. And same for, you've got radiographers, you've got physios. I think physios are a big one. A lot of people automatically think of a physio as someone who's going to give you a massage, but physios in terms of hospital environment, these guys are so incredibly important to the intensive care environment, because they're there to work on your respiratory care. And these guys are so important. Yet if I mention a physio to someone out on the street, their automatically instant reaction is, a physio is someone there who's going to give you a rub down and make sure your muscles are all right. That's not their role. The physio's role within a hospital environment is totally different to what most people expect. And the roles could go on and on and on. There's hundreds of different roles within a hospital, which for me, I never really knew about prior to working within a hospital. And I'd say the majority of people don't particularly know about on the street.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Again, a little bit more privately, sort of before the podcast, and a little bit sort of earlier on. It's that I think I mentioned it on the previous two as well. I think sort of you have your own sort of perception of what sort of something is. In this case, sort of it's a hospital. If you look at a hospital, you got your main, maybe your ladder, if you like, or your pyramid, and then sort of I don't think, like you said, I don't think anyone realizes how deep that pyramid goes.
It's huge.
And to that extent, I think people need to sort of have a bit of an open eye. And I think unless you've maybe worked in that industry, it's a bit unclear. So I would say that's why sort of I'm so intrigued to get so many people on, because whether you're working in a gym or you're working in a chip shop or you're working in a hospital, I think, I'm not one for judging a book by sort of its cover. Obviously they're very different. Yeah. So obviously working in chip shops is not going to be the same working in the hospital, but obviously you understand what I mean. But sort of in that perspective, what would you sort of say to someone, obviously, like sort of who goes, your job's not as important because you're not a doctor or a nurse? What would you sort of say to someone like that? Obviously, sort of not doming upset you in a way, but what would you say to that?
I think that is something which is, that's something which within the media perspective is looked upon quite often. It's a rhetoric. You quite often see that there's a hierarchy almost within a hospital, that you're a doctor, they're the top of the chain. You've got nurses, then ODPs, and you're working yourself down. I think if you actually go and work within most kind of hospitals now, there's been a real shift change from the olden times where there was almost a hierarchy of you're at the top of the pyramid, you're down there on the bottom. I'd say now they've realised that actually, in terms of patient care, you get the best patient care by interprofessional working, and without almost there is no hierarchy within that. And if you work within the theatre environment like I have, or other areas such as intensive care, you realise that actually everyone's on a level playing field, and you understand everyone's roles and how important that individual role is. So it's frustrating sometimes where there is that kind of outlook, and that there is a hierarchy, and that a nurse or a doctor or an ODP is higher than maybe a healthcare professional, a healthcare assistant and such. But actually these guys, I would say that what people perceive to be the lower end of the pyramid are actually probably some of the most important people within inside a hospital, because those people allow us to do our job effectively, and without them you can't do a job effectively. So I'll take it from an experience within theatres, your healthcare assistants, so people who are deemed to be unqualified members of staff, are the ones which keep that theatre ticking. They're the ones which are almost have such a wide knowledge of theatre, surgeries, what kit you need, getting things set up, how to keep things running smoothly. Without those guys, we wouldn't be able to. You're only as good as your team players, and that's something you've kind of got to learn from a hospital environment, that without your people on the bottom, you're never ever going to achieve anything. If I'm scrubbed, for example, if I'm scrubbed for a case with a surgeon, I'm only as good as my runner, who may be a healthcare assistant. But if they don't know where things are, they don't know the surgery, they don't know where to get kit quickly and be able to adapt to their practice, I'm not able to perform. And if I'm not able to perform, then the surgeon's not able to perform. So there's no good having all these people on the top of a pyramid if you haven't got people who can assist them. And I think there's that kind of aspect has been seen. If you go and work within a hospital environment now, you see that across the board, that actually that hierarchical kind of thing has almost died out, whereby you're seen as one team and everyone kind of understands each other's roles, and you respect each other's roles, and you understand what they can bring to a table. And that goes from top to bottom. So I think as a team perspective, it's frustrating when you do get looked on from outside as maybe lesser than someone else. But I tend to try and ignore that as much as possible. For me, the most important thing is that my colleagues respect me for what I do, have an understanding of what I do, just as much as I respect some of my other colleagues, whether they be nurses, doctors, healthcare assistants, physios, or even domestic staff. These guys, without domestic, and I think domestic staff need a big say in all of this. They're people who are almost forgotten. If you talk about a hospital in terms of a media aspect, they never get a mention. Yet without domestic staff who come in and clean, they're there talking with patients, they're there coming in and making a difference and allowing us to do our jobs well in a safe environment, and yet they all putting themselves as much as a risk as sometimes as what we do, and they almost don't even get a mention. So it's frustrating at times, but I think within that hospital environment, we all work as a team, and it's nice to have that kind of rapport and everyone understanding what you do and respect you for it.
That's incredible. I think for anyone watching, like sort of who has been like that in the past, and I think you'll sort of realize it. Like I openly admitted it myself. I've been like that in the past for sure. And obviously before meeting you and a couple of the people I know, obviously worked in that hospital environment. It's obvious. It's almost like every little helps, isn't it? In a way, because then if a doctor has to go to another role, which obviously is not within his field, or for example, if some maybe not as experienced, for example, and then there's someone maybe, I'm not going to say below, because obviously, like you said, it's an even playing field, but someone who's obviously not as experienced in that field, you're obviously, unless you're an extremely big-headed person, you're definite. Like I'm all for asking questions. I'm all for getting advice. I'm all for sort of getting help, because at the end of the day, you would rather sort of ask the question and sort of get the right answer rather than get something wrong and look like an idiot. Because then obviously in your environment, that can be a mix between life and death for sure. And absolutely, you get distracted with one thing and you try to figure it out by yourself instead of asking for help when you know you could have. Then sort of I'm definitely not sort of going to think that way ever again. I don't think anyone should, especially if you're watching this podcast. So another big one. So you said you worked in the health and fitness industry for a little bit. I've, I think, this is something which I can definitely sort of speak about with you being sort of fortunately having worked in both sectors or a number of sectors. That big debate between sort of health. We'll sort of we'll go on to sort of obviously more recent times in a little bit, but sort of that in just to start, that difference between health versus body image. How important is that from your perspective, working both in the fitness industry and then sort of in that medical industry, if you like, in the hospital?
Yeah, so I think that's a big point. I think in this day and age, you tend to find, either because of social media or media, that I think more people are more interested in body image than health. Would you say? I don't know. You work in the healthcare industry now in terms of the fitness side of things. I'm guessing as a personal trainer, you get people coming to you and they're more interested in potentially looking good than actually, are they actually healthy? And so there is that kind of that big question: is it better to have the body image, or is it better to have the health side of things? And we, from a health perspective, from the hospital side of things, from our jobs, we'll always go with the health side of things. That you have, it's more important to be internally healthy than externally looking good. On a personal level, I think it's a balance. I think you have to have that balance. I think, it's nice to have a good body image. It gives you, having a good external image helps you in a number of ways, because by looking good, you feel good. And by feeling good, you're able to live a more healthy life. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who externally look spot on, Spartanish, but actually are leading quite unhealthy lifestyles underneath that, which actually, underneath that surface, actually their internal ways of working on healthier
Both
thoughts.
physical and mental. Both physical and mental.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
100% physical and mental. So, there's a lot of aspects to having looking very good. They always say never judge a book by its cover. And, you've got a lot of people on an external kind of front who look spot on, look perfect, almost portray that impossible body image to people. But actually underneath, they're going through either troubles themselves on a mental side of things, but also maybe leading unhealthy lifestyles with putting a lot of strain on their cardiovascular system, or maybe they're smokers and they dabble in maybe things like drugs and stuff. And actually there's a lot of problems there that you can look very, very good on the outside, but actually internally you can be very, very unhealthy. And I think you have to find the balance. Yes, it's good to look good on the outside, but at the same time, you've got to make sure that you focus on some of your internal components as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like I touched on there, sort of like if you are, I don't know, I'm not gonna sort of, as I said, I've done on a podcast on this already, but bodybuilding, for example, getting down to 2 to 3 to 4% body fat is not healthy, guys.
No, exactly.
I've got mates of mine who are like, oh, I can't get rid of this last little bit of fat, and they're already at about 8%. 8% body fat, 9% body fat, and you're like, what on earth are you doing? Like, are you going to step on stage? Like I said, there's nothing wrong with trying to get to 4 to 5% body fat. It's their sport, and we respect equally. It's equally sort of as difficult in that aspect. But then, sort of your average Joe trying doing it, it's very, very unhealthy and physically and mentally.
Actually, we look at like competition bodybuilding, for example. I've got lots of friends who also do competition bodybuilding, and there's nothing wrong with it, and I haven't got any issues with it. It's a sport, and like with a lot of sports, actually sports aren't actually that good on a health perspective. They do a lot of damage. So if you talk about like bodybuilding, like the strain that having excessive muscle mass puts on the heart is huge. Like your heart's having to work double the time, treble the size as someone like myself, who's, I'm okay, but I've not got that excessive muscle that some people have. The heart has to work 10 times as hard for someone who's got that muscle mass. Is that unhealthy? Some people would argue not, and I'm guessing a lot of the bodybuilders from things would say, well, actually, no, I consider myself to be healthy. And yes, but like you said, if you're getting down to a certain percentage of body fat, it's not healthy. I've got friends who've before competition, they have to starve themselves. They have to dehydrate their body literally to a point that they are so dehydrated that if they drank some fluid, you could literally see the water under their skin. That's not healthy. And you get people who do that as a thing and they become quite ill from it. It can make people very unwell. But you look at a lot of sports in general have on healthy as such. Rugby. I was watching a podcast with, I think, James Haskell. Months ago,
Fantastic.
and he was explaining that like his body's almost an absolute wreck now. Like he's not even middle aged, but the amount of pressure those bodies go under from playing that sport at such a high standard, such a high level, the intensity they put their bodies under, it cripples their bodies. So there's that argument: is it healthy? Is it not?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's that fine line between sort of like you said, James Haskell's probably had more head injuries than 10 or so Joes put together. Obviously that's quite a good pun actually. 10 or so people put together. And I think going on to, like I mentioned before, obviously coming on to the other side more recently, it's pretty evident. I was gonna come up eventually. COVID-19 is upon us, ladies and gentlemen, and it has been for a long time. Obviously not for that specific reason. I wanted to get Joe on, just to sort of touch on it. Obviously, we've not got all the amount of time in the world, and I wanted to make sure that I focused on him before going on to this, and I think we've done that. I think it's really important as well that we touch upon it. I'm going to disable the comments on this video just because, obviously, I'm not going to say anything because again, it's very open discussion. So I'm going to obviously disable the comments. I've got my thoughts, and they are definitely going to be very, very similar to Joe's for sure. I'm definitely a lot, I think, more open-minded rather than thinking about sort of not being able to go out or whatever. But sort of give us your experiences of obviously, like you said, you being that Swiss Army knife, being able to change the department, within the space of 5 seconds. What was it like? Obviously, like you said, you worked in that intensive care unit. Obviously, still do. My apologies. Obviously, like I said, like the Swiss Army knife. You could be doing that tomorrow. You could be, sort of doing something else tomorrow. But can you give us obviously some of your sort of experiences through that? Obviously, how you or maybe even your colleagues have dealt with that, or sort of how you've been through, sort of been obviously, what I mean, obviously how you've been feeling throughout this whole sort of situation where you've been obviously going through the pandemic.
Yeah, so it's been an eye-opening experience for, I think, a lot of clinical staff. It's been extremely challenging for a lot of us on both professional and personal levels. I got drafted. Obviously, my normal job would be within theatres. Obviously, we do go down to outlying areas from time to time, like A&E, when situations arise. But we got drafted in, obviously, to COVID intensive care as ODPs for our professional skill set of ventilation, anesthesia, putting people to sleep, ventilation, tube, stuff like that. That's kind of our speciality. We know a lot about that. So we got drafted into the COVID intensive care for that, not just in these last few months, but obviously last year as well, during the first kind of hit. And that's across the board. That's across a lot of different countries across the UK, Australia, New Zealand, America, Europe in general, Spain, Gibraltar, wherever you may be from. There's been a lot of need for moving staff to areas where their assistance might be needed, due to the fact that, we've had such a massive intake of patients that the hospital almost wouldn't be able to survive without other professions coming in to help. From a personal perspective, it's been extremely challenging. I've been away from home now I've been working here for over 2 years, so I've been away from my family now. I've not been able to go home and see them for about a year and a half. My brother, the same, who's a doctor elsewhere, he's not been able to really particularly go home and see my parents. So that's the challenging on a personal level. You're here, you're working 12 to 14 hours a day, then going and seeing a multitude of real big problems, and it's been an eye-opening experience in that sense, that I've never seen anything to the likes of what we've seen over the last few months or year. It's been extremely challenging, extremely difficult circumstances for a lot of staff, even staff who live close to their families. I've got friends who I work with, or colleagues that I work with, who, because of the risks that we're putting ourselves in, we've been in that close contact environment, the chances of us being carriers or getting contaminated with COVID have been high. So we kind of already had made peace with the fact that there was a high chance that we may get COVID. But at the same time, for them, they've had to then put their families, what do? You leave work and are you going home to your family? You're putting them at risk. So I know a lot of colleagues who then had to stay with friends who they work with, or go and stay in hotels because they've not wanted to put the people who they live with at risk, especially if you've got elderly parents or grandparents. It's been difficult in that aspect because on a professional side of things, it's been difficult within the workspace environment because we've seen things on an unprecedented level that, yes, we've dealt with in the past. We deal with these issues, but not on the level that we've seen with this. The numbers and how bad these patients get and how deteriorating they can get, that almost every day it's very difficult to get a win in these situations. So you have to take every little small kind of win because it's so rare to get that. But then you have the aspect of, we're not robots. We don't just shut down and go home and life's amazing. We then have to leave a hospital after 14 hours a day and go home. And when we are almost in the same as the people in the general populace, that we also have our own lives. And so, yes, we're nurses, ODPs, doctors on one perspective, but at the same time, we're members of the general public at that same time. So to kind of take yourself from that 14 hours a day in a real high pressure environment where things aren't going particularly well, to then leaving that, coming home, it's been difficult. It's been challenging on that aspect for sure. It's been tough. I'm not going to lie. For me, I'll speak on a personal level, but I know for a lot of my colleagues as well. I'd say the way that we've got through that amongst my team is we've been there for each other. I mean, from doctors to nurses to ODPs to physios to healthcare assistants to the domestics, that team that we've been part of on the COVID ITU, we've had each other's backs. And when a staff member's been down or they've had to deal with a very bad situation or they're having a rough day, we've had staff who've been there for them. And they've also, in this situation, we've become a family. In that situation, we've had each other's backs. And for me, they've become my family because I've been without my family here. So without them, I wouldn't have got through this. There's no doubt in my mind that if it wasn't for the team and how we've all kind of bonded together and looked out for each other, there's not a chance in hell that I'd have made it through the last year and a half without being able to contact my family or go home and see my family and come home from work and then sleep for a few hours and go straight back to work. I wouldn't have been able to cope if it wasn't for the people I work with.
That's incredible, mate. That is honestly incredible. And I hope any of you who are watching actually sort of, regardless of whatever your thoughts are on whatever decision is made elsewhere, I think you need to sort of take a step back and look at sort of the bigger picture, whether you agree with something or not, with a decision which influences yourselves as a general sort of day-to-day sort of human being. I think you need to look at a little bit wider and have a little bit more about you to say, yeah, I'm not just doing it for myself. So absolutely love that, Joe. We're going to crack into the rapid fire. The rapid fire, obviously you've probably seen it, nice and short and quick. I want you to firstly start off with a classic one. Saying classic. I've only done 2 episodes. I don't know what's so classic about it. I'm going to say more recent. What frustrates you the most about sort of the health industry, if you like?
So I'm going to go slightly out of the box with this one a little bit. It's not so much about the healthcare industry, but about the culture in general within this day and age of social media. Is that I think the thing which frustrates me with the health industry is that you now have so many social media experts, in the fact that in this day and age whereby you've got people who almost can give a view without any need for credentials, any need for anything really, that they can have a YouTube channel or they can put something on Twitter or Facebook, and it almost is taken as fact. And the sad thing for me is in this respect is that these people are now almost listened to greater than people who spent years and years and years and years honing their skills and their knowledge and they're almost considered to be liars. So I think this has been the hardest thing for me with the COVID, especially during COVID, is coming home from a long shift, and as you do, flick onto social media and seeing all this incorrect information and almost, how do I say it without saying fake news, but fake news being put out there by people who haven't really done the research. They've picked certain things out, and they're able to then push that to from their platform. And I'm talking about even celebrities here, influencers, people who've got a standing, that are able to push out a certain rhetoric without any kind of qualifications behind that, and almost they're taken as fact, whereas doctors, medical professionals, seem to be liars, and that we're telling inconsistencies and almost not telling the truth about things. And that's frustrating from my perspective, because I've had it, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues have had it, where we're almost asked on a daily basis, and during this time about COVID, and what do you think, and is it this conspiracy, and they're talking about conspiracy theorists and this Bill Gates trying to with the vaccine, and you're going, it's really difficult to not try and engage in that. Like, you come home and you go onto social media, it's very, very difficult not to engage with that. You have to try and push it to the back and ignore it. But when it's from people, even that your friends and people you respect, who are putting that out there, it's something which I find very, very difficult to put up with. And I'm sure from a fitness aspect, I'm sure you guys have this the same, where I've noticed in recent years the trend of the influencer. So you have people from, I don't know, reality TV, all of a sudden have become experts within the fitness field. They've got no qualifications behind them on that. They're pushing out to their social media following about the fitness industry, exercises, how to live healthy, diet this, diet that, do these exercises, which is all well and good. I'm sure they've got a base level of knowledge, but actually they haven't got anything underneath that. And actually what they're putting out there might work for them, but actually won't work for other individuals. And actually because they don't have that deeper knowledge, they may actually be causing more harm than they're doing good. And I'm sure you've had that as a personal trainer, where you've had clients come to you and go, I've been following so-and-so's regime, and they've given me this exercise to do, or this diet to do, and you're going,
banging your head against
why you're doing that exercise? Do you know why you're doing that? And
exactly.
They don't. And actually the individual who's put that out there doesn't understand themselves, because they haven't got any credentials. Back in the day, these individuals who rant and rave on social media would be the crazy person in the corner of the pub shouting and going,
sure.
And you'd go, right, I'm going to take my drink and go to the other end of the bar. Nowadays, these people are the people that almost have the highest standing and get the most notice, and are taken everything they say as fact, which is sad.
It is incredibly sad. And I think, I think for once, I'm actually going to sort of get rid of that rapid fire and sort of go into this topic, because very, very quickly, because you got about 2 minutes left. I think that's exactly what you said. I've never ever preached about being an influencer. I never ever preach. You influence naturally, but I would never ever 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 call myself an influencer, because at that stage, I'm working this hard, and I'm studying, and I'm researching all these different methods for my university and for myself. And you get these people who, in 5 seconds on an Instagram or a Twitter feed, tell you either the complete opposite what you said, because it's the in thing, or it's completely opposite. And I think that's one good thing to finish on very, very quickly. Joe, one bit of advice, your favorite quote, or your one bit of advice very quickly.
My best piece of advice is stick to it. Whatever it is, stick to it. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have good days. You actually learn more from your bad days than your good days. Bad days are where you take what you've experienced, don't let it drag you down, but use it to push yourself forward. It's not about forgetting it. It's about using it, taking it forward, learning from it, and keeping it with you, but not to drag you down, but to push you forward, really. That's from my side of things, that can be transferred to not just the healthcare industry, but most industries and most people. Don't let something drag you down. Stick to it. Keep going. Don't let anyone ever tell you can't do something.
Mate, that's fantastic. That's fantastic to end this episode 3. Thank you very, very much for coming on, Joe.
Not a problem.
Please share this podcast. It's very insightful for anyone. And thank you very much again for coming on, Joe. Really appreciate it.
No, not a problem, dude. Thank you very much.